Hello, class. We now have arrived at chapter 21 in the Gospel of Matthew. Verse 1. When they had approached Jerusalem and had come to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied there, and a coat with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord has need of them,' and immediately he will send them." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say to the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, even on a coat, the foal of a beast of burden." Look at the commentary. When Jesus and his disciples reached Bethphage on the eastern slopes of the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples ahead to find a donkey and its coat. Jesus told them to bring the animals to him. If anyone questioned their actions, they were to say the Lord needed them. As Messiah, he had the right to request whatever he needed. This act fulfilled a prophecy, Zechariah 9:9, which spoke to the nation of the coming of her king in a gentle manner. This was not the normal manner in which kings arrive, for they usually come as conquerors, riding on horses. A coat was a symbol of peace. Verse 6. The disciples went and did just as Jesus had instructed them, and brought the donkey and the coat, and laid their coats on them, and he sat on the coats. Most of the crowd spread their coats on the road, and others were cutting branches from the trees and spreading them in the road. The crowds going ahead of him and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" When he had entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." Look at the commentary. The disciples got the animals, threw their garments on them to make saddles, and people in the large crowd spread their cloaks and tree branches on the road. Most of these people were pilgrims from Galilee on their way to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. As the people walked along, some before Jesus and some behind him, they were probably singing some of the pilgrim psalms. They shouted the words of Psalms 118:26. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." To him they shouted, "Hosanna in the highest." The entire city of Jerusalem was moved and asked, "Who is this?" Those accompanying Jesus kept answering, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth." Let's read verse 12. "And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, 'It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den.' And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them." Look at the commentary. The cleansing of the temple probably occurred the following morning. As Messiah entered the temple area, his indignation was directed toward those who had changed the character of the temple from a place of prayer into a place of corrupt commercialism. They insisted that the people could not use money circulating in society, but had to change their money into temple currency for a fee, and then use temple money to purchase animals for sacrifice at inflated prices. Since such extortion was completely contrary to the temple's purposes, the Lord overturned their tables and benches in the outer court of the Gentiles while quoting parts of Isaiah 56 and Jeremiah 7. Jesus further demonstrated his authority by healing the blind and the lame who came to him in the temple. Now we look at verse 15. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he had done, and the children who were shouting in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became indignant and said to him, "Do you hear what these children are saying?" And Jesus said to them, "Yes. Have you never read, out of the mouth of infants and of nursing babes you have prepared praise for yourself?" And he left them and went out of the city to Bethany and spent the night there. Look at the commentary. As Jesus healed those who came to him, children ascribed praise to him, shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." Clearly a messianic title. The chief priests and teachers of the law were angered by Jesus' works and the children's praises. Their question to Jesus, "Do you hear what these children are saying?" implied a request that Jesus make them stop. Jesus replied by quoting Psalms 8:2, which speaks of praise coming from the lips of children and infants. By receiving their praise, Jesus was declaring he was worthy of praise as their Messiah. The religious leaders, in rejecting Jesus, did not even have the insight of children who were receiving him. Consequently, Jesus left the leaders and departed from the temple. Verse 18. Now in the morning, when he was returning to the city of Jerusalem, he became hungry. Seeing a lone fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it except leaves only. And he said to it, "No longer shall there ever be any fruit from you." And at once the fig tree withered. Seeing this, the disciples were amazed and asked, "How did the fig tree wither all at once?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it will happen. And all things you asked in prayer, believing, you will receive." As Jesus was making his way back to the city the next morning, he was hungry. This is the commentary now. Saw a fig tree by the road and noticed it was covered with leaves, but there was no fruit on the tree. When Jesus found no fruit, he cursed the fig tree, and it immediately withered. The disciples marveled that the tree withered so quickly. Jesus used this event to teach a lesson in faith. For if they had genuine faith in God, they not only would be able to do miracles such as cursing the tree, but they would be able to move mountains. If they truly believed, they would receive whatever they prayed for. Verse 23. When Jesus entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him while he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?" Jesus said to them, "I will also ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John," he asked, "was from what source? From heaven or from men?" And they began reasoning among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, then why did you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the people, for they all regard John as a prophet." And answering Jesus, they said, we don't know." He also said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things either." Now look at the commentary. Jesus returned to the temple courts. In these courts he confronted the various religious groups. The debate began as the chief priests and elders asked Jesus, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" Jesus answered them with his own question, promising that if they answered his question, he would answer theirs. The baptism of John was from what source? From heaven or men? If they answered it was from heaven, then Jesus would respond, "Then why didn't you believe him?" On the other hand, if they responded it was from men, they knew the people would be upset with them. So they responded they didn't know, and Jesus refused to answer their question. Verse 28. "But what do you think? A man had 2 sons." This is giving a parable here to the chief priests and elders. "A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, 'Son, go work today in the vineyard.' And he answered, 'I will not.' But afterward he regretted saying that, and he went. The man came to the second son and said the same thing, and he answered, I will, sir, I go. But he didn't really go. Which of the two did the will of the father? And chief priests and elders said, the first. Jesus said to them, truly I say to you that the tax collectors and prostitutes will get into the kingdom of God before you do. For John came to you in the way of the righteousness, and you did not believe him, but the tax collectors and prostitutes did believe him, and you seeing this did not even feel remorse afterwards so as to believe in John the Baptist. In Jesus' parable, a man asked his two sons to go to work in the vineyard. First son, he said, would not go, but later changed his mind and went. The other said he would go, but he changed his mind and did not go. Jesus asked which one did the will of the Father. The obvious answer is the first son, because he obeyed. Jesus immediately applied this to the chief priests and elders. While some seemingly accepted the ministry of John the Baptist, their actions proved they were like the second son. On the other hand, many tax collectors and prostitutes received the message of John and did the will of the Father. Therefore, they would be allowed entrance into the kingdom, but the religious leaders who did not believe would be denied entrance. Verse 33. Here's another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard and put a wall around it and dug a wine press in it and built a tower and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey. When the harvest time approached, he sent his slaves to the vine growers to receive his produce. The vine growers took his slaves and beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. Again, he sent another group of slaves larger than the first, and they did the same thing to them. But afterward he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. Look at the commentary. In another parable, Jesus continued to demonstrate the response of the nation of Israel to his ministry. He told of a landowner who went to a great expense to make a vineyard productive. He rented out the vineyard to farmers who were to care for it. When harvest time came, the landowner sent his servants to collect what was rightfully his. But the tenant farmers mistreated the servants, beating one, killing another, stoning a third. Other servants were sent with the same result. Finally, the landowner sent his son thinking they would respect him. And if we look at the rest of the parable, but when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. They took him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine growers? They said to him, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end and will rent out the vineyard to other vine growers who will pay him the proceeds at the proper seasons. Look at the commentary. It seems clear that Jesus was speaking of the nation of Israel that had been carefully prepared by God to be his fruitful vineyard. The care of the vine had been committed to the nation's religious leaders, but they had failed to acknowledge the master's right over them and had treated his messengers and prophets badly. They ultimately would kill his son, Jesus Christ, outside Jerusalem. Jesus asked the listeners what they thought the landowner would do to those unfaithful farmers. Obviously, he would bring judgment upon them. The land would be taken from them and used by other tenants who would give him the rightful share of his harvest. And Jesus, we see in verse 42, continued in this parable. Did you ever read this is not the parable, he just now asked them, did you never read in the scriptures the stone which the builders rejected? This became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing the fruit of it. And he who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard these parables, they understood that he was speaking about them. When they sought to deceive him, they feared the people because they considered him to be a prophet. Look at the commentary. Jesus quoted Psalms 118, verses 22 and 23, which refers to the rejected stone, which will become the chief cornerstone. By application, Jesus said the kingdom of God was being taken away from those who heard him, and it would be given to the people who would produce its fruit. By rejecting the stone, these builders suffered judgment. The chief priests and Pharisees understood that he was speaking about them, and they tried their best to arrest him, but they were afraid of the people who thought Jesus was a prophet. And that concludes this lecture on chapter 21.